Hello and welcome to the new Forza Motorsport, and in this video we're going to be focusing on how you can get started learning how to drift. Now this is going to be a very entry-level type video. We are literally using a super accessible car as well as almost no tuning, and I will fully explain how you should set up your driver assists and gameplay and things like that. And the track we're going to be using is Laguna Seca, and you really only need to set it up for one lap and no drive avatars because that just gives you space to practice. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Now, while this car does not have crazy steering angle or insane amounts of horsepower, it still allows you to get a really good baseline level of practice. And especially if you're new to Forza, or maybe you're new to just drifting in games like this in general, learning how to do this in a lower horsepower car will make it so much easier later on down the road when you move on to a higher horsepower car, something with 500, 700, 900 horsepower, and so on. And I think another thing about using something that doesn't have a ton of steering angle also keeps you a lot more on your toes and makes sure that you learn what all of the dynamics mean in terms of what the car is doing. Now, assists wise, I'm running basically everything off. I have ABS on because I like using it in races, but you don't really need to leave it on for this because it doesn't affect the handbrake. And as far as the clutch goes, I do have the clutch enabled. You don't have to in order to do this, but I highly recommend it because it allows you to be a lot more precise with your handbrake pulls, as well as clutch kick the car mid-corner, which can help you if you feel that you're starting to lose angle, or if you're just trying to kick the back end of the car out and maybe you're in terminal understeer or something, like you've really messed up your entry and you need some way to upset the car and correct the understeer. So with all that out of the way, I highly suggest running all assists off on manual with clutch if you want to get the most out of what you're doing and you want to get the most out of your practice. Now, you can use really any track that you want. I decided to use Laguna Seca for this, and then I set it to one lap and no drive avatars. And then once we got into the track, I set it to cosmetic damage only because you don't really want to really have to worry about tire wear when, literally what you're doing is going to wear out your tires. So think about that while you're jumping into the race, because you don't want to necessarily set yourself up to have to worry about tire wear in a drift session. Like, I suppose you could do it if you really wanted to be realistic about it, but again, that's entirely up to you. Another thing to keep in mind is that in order to keep this tutorial extremely accessible, I basically did almost no tuning on the car at all. It has no aftermarket parts. It is literally exactly as you buy it from the in-game dealership. Now, one thing that I did change was I changed the pressures in the rear tires. I bumped them up super high, like way too high. I believe they were about 50 PSI, and you might think, why the heck would you do that? That's way too high. The reason why I did that is to intentionally make the rear of the car extremely loose so that you would have to focus on catching the car all the time, and so it would just be easier to get the back end of the car to break away when you're at virtually any speed. It's kind of exactly the same as adding, some extra horsepower or making the track slick by just bumping up your tire pressures a whole bunch. And again, I wanted to keep this extremely accessible, and I wanted to make it so that there were really no in-depth things that you had to change on the car itself, really apart from tire pressure. So I wanted to go ahead and kick things off, and I was trying to see if our tire pressure was high enough to get this thing to do a burnout on stock power, and not really. Not really. Now, what I would suggest doing first off is coming down here to turn 1 in second gear, easing the car in and just rolling onto the throttle, letting the back end of the car come out, and then allowing the steering to return to center and letting the car catch itself. If you correct too much, you will basically spin every single time, and the counter steer, or rather the natural counter steer in this game, is pretty aggressive. I find it to be even more aggressive than those of prior Forza Motorsport games like Forza Motorsport 5, 6, and 7, and I find in those games, you had to be a little bit more aggressive with your own countersteer, whereas in this game, the natural countersteer itself seems to be a lot more aggressive than you are, essentially, or rather than you need to be. So if you find that you are spinning out constantly, just keep repeating this corner in both directions over and over and over again, and don't worry about the handbrake, don't worry about the clutch, just think about approaching that corner in second gear, giving it a little bit of throttle, letting the back end of the car come out, allowing it to naturally catch itself, and then carrying that on through the corner as far as you can. Now, if you try to flick the car in and it immediately loops on you like it did back there, that means you've put way too much throttle in it. And also, if you find that the car is whipping around all over the place, like violently whipping to both sides of the track and things like that, again, you need to really ease off of the inputs and make your inputs as smooth as you possibly can. And I understand that that's not always the easiest thing to do, especially when you're just getting to grips with the controls, or maybe you're not used to playing with the assists off. But either way, keep running that corner over and over and over again, with smoothness being the #1 goal in your mind. Now, what you're about to see on this next run is what happens when you're in a good rhythm, you're in a good groove, and then you give it just a little too much and you run out of steering angle. Now, if you find that that exact scenario is happening a lot, start to ease up on the steering, for one, and for two, I know that if you're looking at the car from the back, if you're looking at it from the third-person view, it doesn't look like all that much angle during the slide. And you might think, well, am I actually sliding? Am I not? You know, is this enough angle? If the car, in my opinion, if the car is even just a little bit sideways and you're carrying out that slide, you're working on the element of car control that you wanted to work on in the first place. Now, of course, that's going to change if you're in something with more steering angle, more power, and your overall goal is to achieve a certain amount of angle in that drift. I mean, yes, that is going to change how you would look at it, but at the same time, I mean, this angle right here is really about as much angle as a real world BRZ, or really almost any front engine rear wheel drive factory production spec sports car. That's about as much angle as they're going to be able to achieve in most scenarios. And really, you're not going to be going all that much further than that. And whether you're doing this specifically to work on drifting, or you're doing it to kind of improve your skills overall in terms of catching the car, like if the car breaks loose in the middle of a race and you want to work on catching oversteer, you can use this to work on that too. And if you want to continue on throughout the track, that's also something I definitely recommend doing, because you're going to find different scenarios, you're going to find different ways to work on things at different speeds. Now, when you go up from second gear to third gear, I don't know why I looked back right there, that was kind of a terrible moment to look back, but when you go from second gear to third gear, you'll find that it's, even though you're going faster, it's a little bit easier to maintain that momentum and maintain the car at a given angle. Now, right there, what we basically did was we took the car to as much angle as it could possibly have without spinning it out. But the problem is, when you do that, you run out of momentum. So you want to keep it below that maximum amount of steering angle, because again, that will basically cause the car to momentum stall effectively. I also find that this section of Laguna Seca is another really fun area to practice, because you can actually get a lot of room and a lot of run up to momentum flick the car and actually practice e-braking and clutch kicking. And then you have a spot right here where you can just handbrake, turn around, and head on back the other way, because the other direction up the hill, believe it or not, is also another really fun way to practice drifting on this track. And remember, the biggest thing at the end of the day is focusing on keeping your inputs smooth. As long as it's, you know, anything other than a e-brake or a clutch kick, which those pretty much have to be abrupt, you really want to focus on keeping your inputs as smooth as you can. And if you do that, you should be able to find that happy medium of balance within the car. And it's not going to look, you know, it's not going to look pretty right off the bat. You kind of have to understand that it is not going to look pretty, and that's fine. You know, I'm sure there's going to be people out in the comments that are going to say something like, these drifts look horrible, they look like crap. And I'm like, for one, It's not a prepped drift car, and this is more of a demonstration of what a practice session might look like than what I don't know, like a full in-depth drift run with a prepped drift car on a specific course is going to look like. And again, right there, you're gonna have a lot of scenarios like that. You're gonna have a lot of scenarios where you think you've got it, and then the car just comes all the way around, and that's that. And just rewind and try it again. Try to feel out where you may have been able to put in more steering angle, less steering angle, what is going to give you the corner that you want, and then try to replicate that. Once you get a couple of drifts that feel really, really good and you go, oh, that's what I wanted to see how many times you can replicate that. And if you approach it from that perspective, I promise that you are going to be pretty much linking corners together in no time at all. But if this helped you out at all and you want to see any more of the new Forza Motorsport, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all next time.